All right, everyone, we're going to get started with our wonderful afternoon. I hope you're all going to be just as excited as I am about what we're doing today. We have an amazing panel that's going to be with us today, and they're going to be sharing with us some of their stories. Some are very personal, all are incredibly inspiring. And they're going to be talking about what their lives would be like if we moved from the idea of awareness of mental health to the idea of acceptance. That's what we have been promoting this year on our children's mental health platform. And we wanted some experts to speak with us about this. Now, this is a very informal setting today. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll just tell you their name and where they're from, and then we will do what I'm calling a table talk. I'm going to ask them then to share their stories. I will have some questions afterwards. They're going to talk to one another. We're just going to have a wonderful 90 minutes here today, and we will have time for your questions also. So in the Q&A, you're going to want to put your questions, comments, anything you want us to know. So let's get started. Francesca, just introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, so my name is Francesca Regeter. I go by Fran, and I'm coming in from Parkland, Florida.
Great to have you with us. Dylan, how about you?
Hi, I'm Dylan Nason, and I'm coming from Pennsylvania, Bucks County.
Wonderful. Andy?
Okay, got it. Hi, I'm Andrew Velasco. I always go by Andy, and I'm coming in from Phoenix, Arizona.
Great. And Rashawn?
What's up, everybody? Rashawn Miller here, and I'm coming from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Awesome. And now, before these wonderful people start, I do want to do a shout out to our sponsor. CareSource has sponsored this today, and we'll turn this over to Josh Boynton for just a second.
Thank you, Linda, and welcome everybody. This is going to be a wonderful 90 minutes. We are so excited. As you know, CareSource is a nonprofit managed care organization. We've been around for 35 years, and the work that the National Federation is doing, the work that all of you on the phone and on this webinar today are doing is so impressive. You know, shifting from awareness to acceptance is in our DNA at CareSource, because acceptance inspires action, and we're all about action. So on behalf of CareSource, thank you for the privilege and honor to be with you today. We're excited to hear from all of you and look forward to connecting at some point in the future. Linda, thank you for your leadership as well.
Oh, thank you, Josh. And it's important that I mention that Josh not only is the Vice President of CareSource, he is also the treasurer for the National Federation Board, and his support is tremendous. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay, let's get started. Rashawn, how about you start us off with your story? Just what kind of a path have you traveled?
Oh man, Linda, that's a loaded question. First I want to say that, now I am a licensed therapist based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Also, I am the founder of Eustress Inc., which is a nonprofit to raise awareness in Black and Brown communities for around mental health. My journey starts. I would say initially when I was a young lad in Berkeley County in North Carolina. So I grew up in rural North Carolina where we had very limited resources, but there I grew up in a small community where I honestly was the man there. I played 3 sports: basketball, football, and ran track. I was all state in track and all region in football, but then also graduated near the top of my class. And ended up going to the University of North Carolina Carolina at Chapel Hill on an academic scholarship. Once getting there at UNC, I struggled a bit just because coming from a small town and then going to a larger school was tough to transition to. But then also with that, I'm coming from a predominantly Black community, and going to a predominantly white institution was also something that was a struggle for me. Just because it was just, so many levels to, adapt into that particular change. But then also I walked onto the football team and the track team at UNC. And so trying to juggle classes in addition to 2 Division I sports was tough within itself too. So then going into my sophomore year, well, actually after my freshman year, I almost failed out of school. So I was on academic probation. So that was one blow to my identity, I would say, as a scholar. But then also sophomore year, I had a knee injury that sidelined me, and I couldn't play sports anymore. So that was the beginning of my spiral. But I didn't know I was going into a spiral. You think about 18, 19-year-old Rashawn, and someone that was always on top of the world, and now I'm starting to have these moves of depression. But I didn't know what depression was at that particular moment. I didn't want to leave my dorm room. I didn't want to eat. I lost about 25 pounds over a matter of 6 weeks. Went through a period where I didn't sleep for 2 whole weeks. And also during this time I started to hear voices. So for me, that was like I said, the turning point. But then also I was scared to talk about what was actually going on with me. Luckily for me, I'm the only child, and my mom is she's very in tune with who her son is. So even when talking with her on the phone, she would ask me, "Baby, what's wrong?" And I would tell her, "Nothing. I'm good." But with that, she said that, well, since you don't want to tell me what's going on, I'm gonna get your cousin to come check in on you. My cousin went to a neighboring college, and they came and picked me up. But then also, they kept asking me what was wrong, and when I didn't tell them what was going on, they took me to a local hospital. And I was put into the psychiatric ward. One of the things for me is I fought the entire way there. And I ended up punching a nurse when I got to the hospital, and that landed me into a straitjacket in a padded room. And so this was one of my scariest moments of my life, because to look through the glass at my parents and my other family members that were there, they were crying, and I'm crying because I didn't want to be there. And then also I didn't know what they were going to do to me. But then also with that, no one in the hospital, in that particular unit looked like me. And so, coming up where I'm came from, like, we really already don't trust a lot of medical professionals. But then also with that, if you got someone that doesn't look like you really don't trust them. And then you were talking about mental health as well. And so that's not something that we really discussed. But being in the hospital, I was eventually diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder with psychotic features. I was able to leave the hospital, but they told me I couldn't go back to school. And that was a struggle for me, because for one, I didn't know what else to do with my life at that particular moment. But then also I didn't want to go back home. Because I was afraid to just talk about what the things and issues that I had going on. So I ended up moving to Charlotte with my uncle, and started to see a therapist. And this was a major turning point for me, because the therapist that I saw was a Black male, Dr. Kendall Jasper. And he looked like me, he talked like me, he even dressed like me. And so that was a major shift for me in being able to talk to him. I started treatment, I got on medication, I got better. But then of course, when I got better, I was like, all right, I'm cured, I don't need this anymore. So I stopped going to treatment, stopped taking my meds, ended up going back to school, and my symptoms ended up coming back. But for that, during that time period, instead of me going back to treatment, I started to self-medicate with alcohol. And I was going through a fifth of tequila every other day, and I did that for over 3 years. But then also during this time period, I was dealing with suicidal ideations. So I attempted suicide 3 times. The first 2 times I tried to overdose on pills, and the last time I put a gun in my head and pulled the trigger, and it jammed on me. So for me, that was my wake up call. to actually get back into treatment and to actually, be able to address my issues. But then also, that's what led to me wanting to become a therapist as well. So ended up going to get my master's in counseling and becoming a therapist. I'm now pursuing my PhD in international psychology. I have everything done except for my dissertation. And then also I started my organization, Eustress, which does a lot of different programming in the community, especially the community, to help bring resources to folks that look like me. That it's not even just about raising awareness, but like you said, it's also about creating that action. And that's where I do that with the mental health awareness walks. I do that with the mental health awareness gala. I do adult coloring nights. I host a program where I work with middle school children and everyone that's in their life. That includes the teachers, that includes their parents and everyone that's in their household, and giving therapy to them for free. And so being able to change the ecosystem of how mental health is treated in one's life, but then also being able to, impact future generations. So, and then also I have a private practice as well in Charlotte, where I have about 8 therapists that work with me as well. So, I turned, the things that I went through and really wanted to make an impact on the community, because I live by the motto, be who you needed when you were younger.
Oh, can you say that one more time, Rashawn?
I said I live by the motto, be who you needed when you were younger.
Be who you needed when you were younger. I've got to remember that. That's amazing. We will be hearing lots more from Rashawn in a few minutes. Rashawn, if you look in the chat, you will see that you are getting some amazing comments. We like people who are able to overcome no matter what the situation is. And your comments about people who look like you couldn't be more important. We need to remember those also. So thank you, and we will be back with you in a few minutes. Hey, Dylan, how are you? You want to talk to us? Let's hear about your story. And guys,
Awesome.
please, if you have questions, you see the little Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Let's get your questions for these folks into the Q&A. Go ahead, Dylan.
Thank you, Linda. It was awesome to hear from you, Rashawn. I'm actually going to drink some water before I start. So where I am right now, I'm 25. I have a lot of experience on and off with volunteering with different groups in my area, local mental health groups and peer support groups. And I got to this position from my story, from everything I've been through. And when that started, all the way at the beginning, right? I wasn't raised in my parents' household. The first 5 years of my life, I lived with my godmother and her family. And then I lived with my family after that. They were more capable of taking care of me. And when I lived with my family, I had a stepdad. I never really had like my real biological father, but my stepdad was my dad, he was my father. His father was sexually molesting me over the course of 5-6 years. From as young as I can remember till I was about 10 years old. During this time, I had been a victim of child pornography and I was given alcohol. And I learned about the wrong, like how wrong it was. I learned that it was not a good thing to be happening in school because I saw a video about it, about what sexual abuse was. So I came forward about it to my parents as soon as I found out what actually had been going on. And I went through the whole situation with the police. He went to jail. I never really told them everything that had happened because I was a child. They only asked me one time, and I remember being questioned in a room that was like a questioning room. Like it was kind of scary. So the whole truth never came out. He's out of jail by now. But after that happened, I went to therapy one time that I remember. And the therapist in that session had me draw a picture about my feelings. Now, with that drawing, I had a bad freak out afterwards, and that was because my abuser had also had me draw pictures before, which I hadn't told, no one had known. But that was the reason why I had such a bad freak out after that therapy session. And I was like 10 years old, a little kid. My parents didn't make me continue going to therapy after that. I had about one talk with my family that I remember afterwards, and it wasn't my entire family. It was my mom, and she told me that she had been abused too, and I could communicate back and forth with her if I needed to. Now, growing up in a Christian household, we never talked about it after that. It was kind of just shoved underneath the carpet and everything went on as fine. And kids who go through trauma are going to find ways to self-soothe, and they're going to find ways to cope with things they're going through. So after I was 10 years old and went through that, I started self-soothing and self-coping with pornography, with self-harm and with drugs. The self-harm and drugs started happening when I was 14, entering middle school, high school time. But throughout that entire time, it was pornography. Like that was my coping skill as a young adult or as a young child. That's what I knew. And I didn't know any different. You know, my family never talked to me about it. They never told me that it was bad. So that's how I was coping with it for a large part of my life. And when I turned 18 years old with those same coping skills, my drug use had escalated from marijuana to psychedelics. And with that transition, my brain had gone into psychosis. And at this point, a lot of the trauma that I had been pushing down had resurfaced, and I felt a whole lot of guilt. And I felt a whole lot of guilt for the ways that I had been coping. And I didn't understand how to deal with those feelings that I had. So, of course, it's also hand in hand with psychosis, but my self-harm turned into much more intense after that, where it wouldn't be like small minor things that I could hide. You know, my family never knew I self-harmed. But when I turned 18, my self-harm had got to a point where I couldn't hide it. It was almost every single time that I did, it ended up in me going to a hospital. I needed to get surgery afterwards. I'm not going to go into details, but like it was really intense. I got diagnosed as schizoaffective because of how outlandish these self-harming moments were. And they weren't attempts on my life. It was more like I deserved pain and I didn't know how to punish myself. But I needed some type of balance to balance out like everything wrong that I thought I had done. So I was self-harming pretty intensely for about 3 years straight, in and out of hospitals. I self-harmed in the hospital straight. I remember going in and actually no one even noticed that I was self-harming there for a very long time. And when I transitioned from one hospital to another, they saw that my wounds had actually, like the skin had died. And I had a lot of like dead skin on my wounds, and I had to go through a process of healing. So yeah, it was really intense, and there was really no way that anyone else could have pulled me out of there, because I wasn't telling the doctors the truth about the delusions I was having. I was still trying to figure out why I wanted to self-harm the way I did, but I wasn't being completely honest with my treatment throughout that process. So about 3 years of that process, I started to gain more control in my treatment, and I wanted to really have things down. Like I wanted to get out of that cycle. It was horrible. And I felt like I was stuck. So I went back to psychedelics, and I ended up running away. I was in a group home outside of the hospital, but I wasn't allowed to be at home because of my self-harm, and my brothers and my family, they couldn't see it. They were protecting my little brothers, which I understand completely. But I ran away, and I tried to just restart my life because I didn't want to do suicide. So when I ran away, I was gone for like a week. I ended up taking a train to the city, and I got into a group home in the city for men who are dealing with mental health issues and also drug abuse issues. So I was there for about 3 days until the insurance company contacted my parents, and my parents found me because I was a missing person. So I go back to my house. after a week of being missing. And at this point, like the medication's almost out of my system. I'm starting to feel better. And even being homeless, I had started to lose weight. So I was feeling better about myself. And like, I'm getting ready to get back onto treatment and go through the process again when my mom overdoses on heroin the day I get back. And my little brothers and we find her, we resuscitate her, and we're bringing her back. She ends up surviving and goes to the hospital, comes out. After that, I went through another bout of going through the hospitals. I tried to get things back on track. I tried meditating, doing yoga. I tried doing everything I needed to, but ended up self-harming again. And it was not okay. So I went back to the hospital. And when I was there, I'm totally fed up with myself and everything that's going on. And this is actually the state hospital this time. So it is one of the worst hospitals that I could have been to. And when I was there, the therapist that was talking to me had me describe my feelings, which I hadn't had from a therapist before. And they had me feel my feelings. They had me sit there and sit with my feelings and really feel it. Now that was a big change in my treatment because I hadn't had that type of treatment. So I felt like the doctors were on my side for once. When that happened, I started to advocate for myself. A little bit later in that same hospital, they tried putting me on a certain medication that I wasn't really okay with. And when that happened, they actually threatened to 302 me and keep me in there. But I stood my ground and I didn't get put on the medication, nor did I get 302'd. And that really solidified like, hey, I do have a hand in my own treatment. I can really take control of myself without having to run away from everything that's going on. Like I don't have to avoid, I don't have to lie. Like I can be right here and advocate for myself. It was a big turning point in my life right there. So that was the last time I went to the hospital. I got out and I started to volunteer. I volunteered with the suicide prevention committee in my local area, also with a peer support group. And being there, I was able to find people who supported me and asked me to tell my story and asked me to get involved with them. So I started doing that, and it was really awesome. And I'm like, ooh, I'm like way better now. I'm like way up here. I'm functioning. I'm okay. And about a month later, maybe 2 or 3 months later, I got my own place. Actually, I moved out of a group home, got my own place, and I'm doing really good. When it happened, I started to get into a relationship. In that relationship, the person who I was in a relationship with had a mental disorder called BPD, which is a personality disorder, and it can be pretty intense. Being with someone who has an intense disorder, as mine was pretty intense, it kind of brought to me or brought up to the surface that I wasn't as actually healed as I thought I would be, or as I thought I was. So I kind of took a step back from all the volunteering that I had been doing to do some more work inside because I still had more work to do. Like I wasn't finished healing all my trauma. I got to a point where I could like definitely advocate for myself and get on medication and go to therapy, but I wasn't really completely healed. So since then, I've been battling my awareness and being able to keep a consistent job and being able to function in society as a normal person. It's been hard for me to keep a job, and it's also been hard for me to keep on volunteering. But that's okay because it's waves that is coming in. It's like seasons, and I'm gonna get through this part of my life and onto a different part. But right now, after all that had happened, I am right there. I'm figuring out what I'm going through. I'm healing myself while figuring out how to be a functioning member of society fully. And that's all I can really ask for. So that's my story. That's where I am. And thank you all for listening.
Bill, and that story your journey is just unbelievably inspiring. And I'm so excited to see what the next phase is going to be like for you.
Thank you.
All right. Andy, how about we hear from you? Can you tell us about your journey?
So of course I can talk. So my journey into all of this type of, I guess this like world of mental health acceptance is always been, I would say kind of started off when I was like a kid. It's definitely one thing where I didn't realize how early it started off. I mean, if you were to ask me about a month ago, I feel like I just got into it. Like it still all feels so new to me, and I'm still always learning. But when I was young, I say I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, because I've definitely been here more than half of my life. But I was born and I did live in California for a good portion of time. I moved here when I was like 7, and having moved here when I was 7 is definitely a big like looking back on it, it's one of those big things where you realize like that's when a lot of things definitely started to change for me, not only just like with my social groups, but even in like my day-to-day lives. And I will point out one aspect of a lot of my story. It's kind of ironic when I was thinking about it, is a lot of my story and like my journey always has to do with me in my most social elements, which was always at school. So I always think about maybe that's probably why I grew up to become the teacher that I am today. But I do know that growing up, I had been living with ADD, but it wasn't made aware probably up until I reached 6th or 7th grade. And that was always one of the most difficult things, because it made not just like education difficult, but it made such a day-to-day life such a difficult thing growing up. And like the social standards, it was always really, really hard, because you have those people who will look at you and they don't think that you're listening, the people that don't think you're paying attention, and some of them will look at you and think that you're rude. But I did always have like the few where they would like mock me or bully me growing up because oh, you're not paying attention. The worst was, and it's one of those things where you never think it happens until it actually happens, is when people are talking to you and you get the like snaps at you. But those are always the worst ones. But definitely education wise, a lot of my talk's probably going to be education focused, but education wise, growing up with ADD and not having anybody know about it, from family to teachers, is always difficult, because it becomes me looking at a problem and genuinely not understanding it, and not having anybody trying to meet me to understand it. It's just, here it is, why can't you figure it out? And I remember one of the worst things is math. Math is the death of me, which is why I teach English. But math was definitely one of those things where, and I tell it to my students every day, like, don't try to tell me your math problems. I can't help you. But I look back on it, and it's definitely such a serious thing where it's like, I definitely think it stems more to the fact of I never had an acceptance when I was growing up with ADD, that nobody was ever to actually stop and help me with what I needed. So I used to have like teachers yelling at me. I used to come home and I used to beg my sister, like, can you please teach me how to do the math? I don't want to go to mom. I can't have mom teach me the math homework. And then it would get to a very extreme point to where I remember I would be crying to my sister, like, can you please teach me? And then my sister's looking at it and she's crying for me. I can't figure this out. And then it goes to mom. And those moments, she is a wonderful woman, but before she knew what was going on, math, me and her was a nightmare. Nobody wanted to be in the room because it was just so hard to watch. And I always look back on it, and I definitely say it added to the aspect of why I don't want to do math, because I think, and I remember like the hard moments of like just constant, like just constant yelling. Like I remember trying to figure out fractions, trying to figuring out how time works. I had such a hard time figuring out the difference between AM and PM. Like I couldn't make that connection, couldn't make that click. But it's definitely one of those things where now, having grown up that way, having done it through elementary school, having done it through middle and high school, I always try my best to put it into what I do now. And that's just on the ADD aspect. I talk to students and I give them my tactics that I learned. I always advocate during every time I have like the IEP or 504 meetings with like parents and their students who do like live with these different types of illnesses. I always advocate like there's nothing wrong with medication, because I do know, growing up in like such, even like more than just a Hispanic household, but growing up in such a Hispanic household, there's such a strong stigma against being medicated. And I do remember when I got on an ADD medication, there was a bit of pushback, not from my parents, but definitely the parents of parents, grandparents, abuelos, abuelitas, and ninos, ninas, tias, tios, thinking like, why are you putting him on a medication? Like, that's not the way it works. You have to, I don't know, Mexican remedy, rub an egg on him and then it's going to be all better or something like that. Or everybody in my family wasn't, but all the other family we were all Hispanic, so they grew up very Catholic, and they think if you just take him to church, it's gonna like cleanse him and clean him. And so we had a lot of pushback from the fact of me getting on medication. But now I always try to push onto students, like, I do understand, like, it's such a hard thing to accept and to take, but trust me, like, it's one of those things where it helps you get your life together. I always like to advocate as well, like, it's not even something that like you have to take religiously, because I do understand the aspect of I don't want to have to rely on it. And I tell them, well, use it like a tool. You don't need a hammer all the time, but when you're putting in the nail, you're probably going to need a hammer. So it's like, you don't need to use it all the time, but when you're on these big parts of your life where you need that push and that focus, it's probably going to be the best time to use it. I even know myself, like, I just jumped on it recently because I've been having so much going on that I can't focus. And so I was like, you know what? I need that extra help. I need my tools right now. And that's just having grown up with the ADD aspect. Another part of my like journey, and probably even the biggest part of my journey, was having growing up with depression. I grew up with a clinical depression, and it wasn't even something that was made aware to me or to anybody until probably like my anywhere between like the end of freshman year, sophomore years of high school. Because I do always remember growing up, even as a kid, and having this weird thing of like, how come I feel more than everybody else? I would see like my friends, I would see like my dad and all the other men in my life. And I'm like, they're so stoic, they're so strong. Why am I not? And it was such a hard thing to deal with. Growing up, I thought the only time you were allowed to cry is when you're watching Rocky 3. Like, that was the only time I ever saw men in my life cry, was on Rocky 3. So I was like, why am I crying for what feels like no reason? But I always remember a lot of breakthroughs for me was having a good system. I do know growing up, I didn't have any idea about what I was feeling. I didn't have any idea about why I was sad. And then it was funny because you start with sad, you don't know why you're here. And then I just get mad because I'm like, why am I like this? Why am I different? Why am I sad if there's nothing happening? And I would always have such strong instincts of like just being enraged. And I remember just being alone in my room and throwing things around, and I would want to like break something all the time. I would tell myself, but then I'd be like, no, because mom's going to get mad and dad's going to yell at me. And I always compare it to say my version of like self-harm was a way that wouldn't leave too much evidence. Was I would usually always go outside, or I would do it in my room alone, where I would just punch like a wall repeatedly, because I was like, well, I can't break the brick wall outside. And I remember it used to usually leave me like really bruised and really like messy hands, and I would just put band-aids on it. And then the next day, it definitely didn't help the situation when the next day I show up and all the guys there are like, what happened to your hands? And I'm like, I punched something. And boys being boys, you think that was cool. So all of a sudden I'm getting praise because I'm acting out like this. So it definitely didn't help. It made me think, okay, this is how I should put my stuff away. Because after I did that, I did let loose and I felt something. So I felt better. And now I got praised at school, where I don't get praised anywhere else. So for a long period of time, it's definitely what pushed me to do that, until I know one day I finally hit my breaking point and I couldn't make it outside. And this moment, it's one of those moments where I do understand that it wasn't good, but I always like to try to look at everything with a sense of humor. So I look back at this moment and I always find it's kind of humorous. Of I had a breaking point. I remember, I think it was like my freshman year of high school, that early years where everything's just changed and different. You're in high school and everything's tense. I had a dresser in my room that wasn't really a dresser. It was like an office metal file cabinet that we just made a dresser. And I couldn't make it outside. So I remember I was like, okay, this is what's nearest to me. This probably isn't gonna break. And I started pounding on it. And then my parents came into the room. And the funniest part to me, this is where I say it's probably not the best because I didn't do a good thing, but I look back on it with humor, is the look on my dad's face when he saw the dresser and the state that it was in, and then seeing like little me. You can't tell because I'm sitting down, but I'm a small person. Like, did you do that? And it's like, yeah. But I do know that that was the moment with my mom where I can talk personally to my mom being like, I need help. Like that, I didn't want to do that. That was me lashing out really bad and I needed help. And that's where I found what I would consider my first coping mechanism to stop the bad habits, which was at first religion. And it's something that was accepting of everybody. It wasn't the medication and it wasn't some weird at-home remedies. It was something that a lot of people have done. And for some, it's definitely tried and true. And it worked for like the longest time, probably about 2 to 3 years. I was super into religion. I was like one of those Jesus freaks at school I literally had a t-shirt that said Jesus freak. I was like the drummer in the choir. I would write messages and deliver messages to my youth group. I would travel and go to camps and sermons and messages out in public. But I know when I got to college and like I left the youth group and there was no churches near my college and I was out on my own. There was no parents. It was just me, is when everything finally came back. And it was one of those realizations of like, oh, wow, like I didn't actually tackle this problem that I had in my past. I just put it away. I found something to cover it up. And it definitely affected my education in college. I couldn't focus. It affected my relationships in college. I was at the time living with somebody. We had been dating for like close to 5 years. And I started to I didn't know it at the time, but I was just sinking deeper and deeper into like a depression that I couldn't understand at the time. But I always remember her noticing and me saying like, it's terrible to say, but me being like gaslighting, like, you're crazy. I'm fine. Like, look at me. I'm okay. And I remember losing that relationship when she finally said like, I can't do this anymore. Her leaving was like that last like landline that I had. And I fell into such a spiral where I was drinking like a lot more than I ever did. I was never even a drinker, didn't touch a drop of it in high school. I was honestly one of those kids who did it when I turned 21. But like I started to drink a lot. I would go out with friends a lot. And I started to wake up in like people's houses, taking Ubers homes and like I went up to like Flagstaff. It's like this woodsy area up in Arizona. So like going out to like raves in the woods and like not knowing anybody, but still taking things that were given to me because I was like, this feels good. This is what I want. Right. But I knew no, college came and went. I had to come home. And the best thing happened to me was COVID. COVID hit and we were all stuck at home. And it was the one time where I was like, okay, I can't leave. I can't talk to anybody. Like I can't physically go out like I used to. Everything is shut. So it was the first time where I was like, okay, I know I had an issue. I did all of that stuff and I didn't feel good doing it. At least the days after, I felt sick and I felt guilty for everything that I did. So it was about time that I sat down with all of this stuff and I did something about it. And so I will always be very, very thankful for this one friend that I had, where one night we were just talking by a fire. And this was the first time where we were just talking, one of those very serious, like 1 a.m. talks, especially we had like a drink in hand and nice campfire. It was nice. But where I was the center of attention. It wasn't me for once listening to somebody trying to help them. It was one of the first times I can definitely say I was the center of attention and they didn't let it change. Every time I tried to do what I usually do, like making a joke and then changing the conversation or trying to get onto them and not onto me, they kept it on me. And I remember I had such a breakthrough. It was like one of the first times I can say I was at like that sobbing stage of like, I couldn't breathe because I was like, oh my God, like everything makes sense now. Everything from like my childhood to who I am today. And that's when I came home and I started to talk to my family for the first time ever. I talked to my mom and I talked to my sister because they're like the two people that mean everything to me. And we would discuss things and it'd be funny because we would talk, we would cry. And then I would say, it's so weird. We talked for 30 minutes and I feel amazing, way better than when I would go outside and punch the wall. And I'm like, and all we did was talk. And so that led me to find therapy and talk to people, professionals. And I know one of the biggest things that it helped me with was one of the biggest blocks in my life I didn't know that I had was my relationship with my dad. My relationship with my dad was, he was there and he did what he had to do. But I always say, like, I love it. I respect him, but sometimes it's hard to love him because I respect him because in Hispanic culture, he's my dad and he did instill great things into me. Like I say, I'm an amazing worker because of who he is. He taught me like strong work ethics. He taught me how to socialize with people, but on the aspects of a lot of the things that like was important for like a relationship, it was never really there. It was hard to be built. But I was able to talk to him for the first time. We had those real conversations. And now I can say my dad and I have amazing conversations and I love him. And I feel like we have this mutual respect between each other because of this journey that I got to go on. And I can say now I use it, everything I've learned to help my students, to help avoid a path that I went down. Like I accept who you are and I'm here to help you. And just now, today, I live out on my own. I just recently got engaged and I'm more so just sitting at a spot in my life where this is the first time where I have nothing going on. I'm healed. I feel happy. And so the question I've been asking lately for myself is, what now?
Andy, thank you so much. I can just tell from listening to you that you're a fabulous teacher. I hope all of you are looking at all of the comments in the chat. There are so many, there's no way we can read them, but I do want you to be sure and see just how amazingly inspiring people are finding this conversation. And now we're going to go to Francesca, who is equally amazing and inspiring. Francesca, it's good to have you here. It's all yours.
Thank you. First of all, the other three panelists, wow, I am filled with so much hope and just my heart. Thank you guys for sharing. Let me tell you guys a little bit about myself. I am the founder and president of Inspiring My Generation Corporation. We're a 501c3 for suicide prevention. That all started really when I was 5 years old. I was a competitive cheerleader, and back then they put us little kids in those tiny little uniforms, and my older sister was just making a joke, like she didn't mean anything by it. She was just being an older sister, but she made a joke about my belly hanging over my skirt. And I just felt so ashamed of myself. And it was really built on that culture that to be a flyer, you had to be this tiny, thin little thing. And I wanted to be a flyer. My mom wanted me to be a flyer. And now all of a sudden, I'm just hyper aware at 5 years old that I don't have the body type to be a flyer. And it just kind of started this feeling of not being good enough and feeling ashamed of myself. So as I got older, that fear of not being good enough just continued to grow. I mean, by the time I was 8 years old, I was terrified of not getting an A. Like terrified that my worth was only connected to how well I could produce and who I could be. By the time I was 12, I was just falling apart emotionally. I spent most of my time having these kind of depressive episodes, but I didn't know what they were. And although I might not seem much older than 12, this was almost 12 years ago now, and people didn't talk about mental health. When I would cry, when I would try to talk about my emotions, people would look at me like, build a bridge and get over it. suck it up. That actually became a thing for a while, where I was shown 3 fingers, which meant suck it up. It was grow up, stop acting like a baby, big girls don't cry, just all these phrases. So I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to talk to, who to open up to. So I started a blog called Inspiring My Generation. And the goal was just that hopefully someone would understand, that someone was feeling the same way I was. I started writing these quotes. It grew into lessons I was learning. But back then, blogging was not a thing, and it was not cool that a 12-year-old was doing it in middle school. So I was bullied and teased endlessly for it. But I was determined that someone would hear my voice and someone would understand. So by the time I was 15, it turned into a podcast. I was like, okay, maybe you're not hearing me, so let me speak louder. So I started a podcast called Inspiring My Generation. And it was a continuation of these conversations, trying to start conversations on feelings, on making memories, on how your words hurt, how your words, being accountable for what you say and for what you do. Driving safe, we're getting ready to turn 16, get our license, and everyone's so excited to be on their own and get to go wherever they want to go. But the importance of being mindful of what we're doing. So that also I was teased over, because podcasting, not a thing back then. And I started to feel so isolated. Like everything I was doing was wrong. Everything that I wanted to do was wrong. I wanted to be able to express my emotions, and couldn't do that because then you're a baby and you're weak. I couldn't talk about it because then that's weird and people don't have those conversations. Couldn't blog about it, couldn't podcast about it, because there were all these voices telling me why it was wrong. That fear of not being good enough just growing deeper and deeper and deeper inside of me. But on the outside, that's not what people saw. They saw this super hyper bubbly blonde cheerleader who was extremely thin and put together, who was in Science National Honor Society, the president. I was the competing in Science Olympiad. I was doing all these things, and there was always a smile on my face. So people didn't see the part where I was just falling apart. By the time I was 17, my parents started to separate. And now at school, I'm teased. I don't feel like I fit in. I'm not one of the very, very smart people, but I'm not one of the smart people. I'm not one of the jocks and athletic people, but I'm not one of them. I'm just this person in the middle who wanted to be Oprah Winfrey. In my high school file, when we were asked, who do you want to be? All that pressure of figuring out what college you want to go to, what major, what your career choice was, my high school file says Oprah Winfrey. And I was so determined to be someone who inspired people, but my world was falling apart around me. And I thought that it was my fault that my parents were separating. I thought that I wasn't good enough to keep them together. I thought I wasn't good enough for them to want to be a family anymore. It had to be my fault. I wasn't thin enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't smart enough. Anything that could be wrong with me was what was the cause of my parents' divorce in my mind. So I didn't eat much. I ate a cucumber or a bell pepper a day and dropped a lot of weight until my kidneys were starting to shut down. Not a great time. In the midst of that, my parents' divorce was just getting very nasty, where both of them wanted to win. And my brother and I just didn't get the emotional support that we needed. And not because they didn't want to give us the support, but because they didn't have the capacity at that point, because all their emotional energy was exerted on this divorce. I was very lucky, though, to have my grandparents and my aunt and uncle be this amazing emotional support for me at that time. My aunt and uncle would pick me up for family game nights, family movie nights. My aunt would pick me up and take me to go shopping, to get my nails done. Just made me feel included. My grandparents, my best friends in the entire world. When I went away to college, my grandfather made a point to FaceTime me 3 times a day, every morning for a cup of coffee, every day after class so I could complain about how much I didn't like my teachers or how much I loved my teachers. And every night for dinner, no matter who he was with or what he was doing, he made sure to FaceTime me and he would pass the phone around to all his friends. My best friend, like in the world, he stayed up all night. Him and my grandmother would stay up all night listening to me study. And within that fear of not being good enough, trying to prove to myself, to my parents, to my family members, to the world, I was good enough and I was worth that attention. I was worth that love. I decided I wanted to do college in 2.5 years because someone had done it in 3 and I had to be better. So I did do it in 2.5 years, but it was really because my grandparents stayed up all night listening to me study. 3 weeks before I'm about to graduate, the day before final exams, my final exam started, my grandparents were in a car accident and my grandfather died upon impact. For the first time, he wasn't going to call me and wish me good luck. He wasn't going to stay up all night with me and study. We weren't going to have a FaceTime coffee date. I wasn't going to get to tell him all about my exam. I wasn't going to get to have dinner with him on the phone. It was never going to happen again. My grandmother was also in the car accident, but thankfully she survived. It's actually her birthday today. I love her so much. I'm really happy that she's still here. And I was very lucky that my teachers allowed me to miss some final exams and still graduate and sleep in a hospital chair next to my grandmother every single night. She had to go through every surgery in the book. She broke 8 ribs, broke a collarbone, her wrist, just everything. So I wanted to be there with her and for her, be there and hold her hand while she learned to walk again, while she learned to get back into a car. And I never took time to think about my loss or to grieve or to cope. I didn't even know I had to grieve or cope. Like no one had talked about that with me before. And I did just everything I could to be there for her. But a month later, Christmas rolled around and a night where my grandparents and I would stay up all night cooking and setting the table and getting everything ready, and then lay in bed in the morning, snuggle, watch The Grinch and drink cappuccinos with a little foam on top, wasn't going to happen. And that was a tradition since I was 4 years old. So for the first time, I'm 20 years old at this point, that just wasn't going to be a thing. And that was the moment it hit me that my grandfather was not here. And I attempted suicide on Christmas Eve. My uncle was the one who really supported me through it and just had the first normal conversation on mental health with me, talked to me about all these different aspects. I mean, I had no idea that nutrition and exercise even played a role in mental health. I didn't know that supplements could be helpful. I didn't know how much value there really is in therapy and the different types of therapy, medications. He just had this full conversation with me and we laid in bed and just talked. I went back to college, starting my master's information systems. 27 days after I attempted suicide, I lost my uncle to suicide. The person who helped me, who was there for me, who had that conversation with me, who made me feel like I could get through this, ended his life. I didn't know how to cope with that. I didn't know how to process that. How did I not see the signs? How did I not know he was struggling the way I was struggling? That just shattered my heart. I withdrew from my master's program for 6 months, moved in with my aunt and little cousins, and did everything I could to be there for them. Stayed up all night with my aunt trying to help her get all paperwork in order, figure out everything that was going on, just hold her while she cried, all day running around with the kids, trying to get them to school, feed them, take them to dance, just be everything for everyone, because that was my pattern. But I never took a moment to feel or to grieve or to cope. I still hadn't grieved my grandfather, and now I had to grieve my uncle as well. Wow. My little cousin's confirmation and my brother's birthday just came up, and a day that everyone would have been together and that would have been such a celebration was so different, and I could not handle it. I ended up attempting suicide on both of those days and was hospitalized in a psych ward. That's when I saw how many other people were struggling. I was not the only person struggling. Like, wow. I was not the only person who felt alone. I wasn't the only person who didn't know who to have conversations with or how to have conversations. But what was different for me than for everyone else, 40 people on my floor, I was the only one who had people show up. I had 10 visitors. You were allowed to. My entire family showed up, even one of my younger cousins. I had the financial means to be there and to get the support. I did not have to worry that I was going to come out and not be able to afford the bill. That wasn't the reality for anyone else. I made a point to learn everyone's name and everyone's story. And to hear how many people were just in the system over and over and over again, who were just used to being in the psych ward because they couldn't afford to be there and they couldn't afford to continue on life. So they just kept ending up back there. That shattered my heart. How could a system that's meant to help us be hurting us? So it was then I decided Inspiring My Generation was more than a blog. It was more than a podcast. It was going to be a nonprofit. And we were going to give a voice to those who lost theirs, whether it was to suicide or for those who were just barely hanging on, who were there, who needed someone to hear them, but no one was listening. So I spent a year in recovery and doing therapy 4 times a day. I'm not 4 times a day, 4 times a week. Sorry, 4 times a week. And just trying to take care of myself and build myself up so I could be someone to support other people and have the capacity. On March 13th, 2020, in honor of my godfather on his birthday, my uncle passed away from suicide, I launched Inspiring My Generation as a nonprofit. Since then, we have launched 3 main initiatives that I'm so excited about. Our Normalize the Conversation podcast. I get to bring on advocates, professionals, people with lived experience, people, mental health nonprofits, all these different people, and hear their stories and hear what resources are available, what information's out there, what new research is coming out. And it's just incredible, all of this hope, all of these people who are going through it and who are actually getting their voice heard. I actually, right before this, recorded the 100th episode. We have a new episode that comes out every Wednesday, so that was very exciting. I have an encouragement card program because when I was in the psych ward and I had family members show up and no one else did, I was so determined to make sure anyone else in that psych ward would know that they weren't alone, that somebody out there cared, that somebody believed in them. So every month we donate up to 500 handmade cards of encouragement, hope, and support to individuals hospitalized in partnered behavioral health facilities. And we're always looking to expand and grow because my goal is to have every single person who's in a psych ward get a piece of hope and a message to know they're not alone. And lastly, our education series. My biggest goal when I started the nonprofit was to develop and create those resources that I always needed but never had. So the first workbook that I put out, I published last year, was called You Are Not Alone. And it's about learning how to cope with your emotions. Because, I mean, I never knew I had to cope. I didn't know what coping was. So I wanted to make sure that other people got that chance to learn and learn what coping skills worked for them. I was so tired of hearing these conversations where people were telling us what coping mechanisms were right for us, what we should do, what happens when they don't work. Finding ones that work for us was so important to me. And then secondly, this month, I published the second one and it was called I Am. And it's about learning how to advocate for yourself because I never had the words to advocate for myself. I didn't have the language. I didn't know that I could. So now I've developed a guide to help people find the words that work for them and get the support that they deserve and need. And I'm excited to put out another one next year that's currently in development. So that is me in a nutshell. Oh, and then I am also back in school. I did finish my master's that I withdrew from. Got my master's in information systems and operations management at the University of Florida, go Gators. And I am currently studying for my master's in psychology at Pepperdine University, go Waves, and hope to do my PhD after and be able to offer therapy and support to people who need it.
Thank you so much, Francesca. That story is just, it is so inspirational. And just the smile on your face as you tell it is very inspirational. Now we're going to go to some questions. You guys, I can tell from the chat that you feel exactly the way I feel from listening to these 4 stories. They're very different. They're people are in different points on their journey, and yet all 4 stories are just incredible stories of hope and stories of taking control and moving forward. So we've got questions. We're going to ask several questions here. We'll ask as many as we can and see what we can talk about. So panelists, if you want to just unmute, because I'm just going to ask you to join in with me here. I do want to start out with something that Andy brought up. And this is an interesting question. You know, we just came through a heck of a pandemic. And I don't know about you guys, but it turned my world sideways. So I would like to hear just shortly, because I have other questions that I want to get to. How did the pandemic affect your mental health?
At first, it was a downward spiral. Didn't know what else to do. So I was just kind of sitting at home, but instead of taking the time to just sit on the couch and like wait for something to happen, that's when I started to decide to do something. So I can't remember which panelist said it, but I do remember somebody mentioned about how mental health is more than just mental health. It's like fitness and nutritional health. And over the pandemic, both my mom and I, since we were staying together, we created a garage gym. So we have a gym in the garage, and that was one of the best things to help me with my mental health, because if something was going bad or I just didn't know how to cope with something, you can just go to the garage for like an hour, run, lift weights. And that was probably one of the best things to help me out with my mental health, so that I didn't spiral down into anything.
Very healthy, very healthy. Rashawn, how about you?
For me, I think the beginning of the pandemic was the opposite for me. It was a much needed break.
Ah.
Because I do so much stuff. I was like, oh, I get to sit at the crib and just chill. All right, I'm cool. But then also it ended up revving up because of the fact that of being a therapist, it was so many people reaching out that wanted help. And then trying to find that balance between wanting to help, but then also that balance of understanding that I need my own time to myself was something that was a struggle. But then also pivoting to being on the computer all day, especially when I'm used to seeing clients and in person. But then also just now I'm so that type of fatigue that comes along with that, it adds to the actual mental fatigue that you already get from communicating with folks. But then also then you have that physical fatigue, and so understanding how to combat those things. I think also just understanding that I think with the pandemic, it was tough in phases, depending on the weather. Because when it was warmer outside, it's easier to get outside and be in a park or some of those things. But then when it's cold, it's tough, and especially when the nights would seem so long. So just understanding those different ways that you're able to address those particular things. Similar to Andy, I had to make sure that I still worked out in some form or fashion. Luckily for me, I had the privilege of having a friend who had a private gym, so I could still go there and work out. Even when the pandemic first hit, because I wasn't too worried about running into anyone. But finding those things, but then also watching the things that I consumed. I think that was something. I know a lot of times we focus on the things that we consume as far as like what we drink or what we eat, but then also I had to watch that. I couldn't watch the news too much because it increased paranoia, or it increased it increased my ability to see humanity in folks. I would say that just because of so many things that was going on. So I had to, cut down those particular things and remain ignorant to some stuff, because like if I remain ignorant to it, I could continue on about my life or focus on things that are right there in front of me. And so then I also just watching, what will I watch on TV, if it impact my mood. So I needed something a little bit more jovial, or with the type of music that I listen to, understanding that also impact me as well. So just being very intentional about how I went about my days, and the things that I actually did.
Yes. I felt some of those same emotions as we were going through that. It was a long, long 2 years, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Dylan, how about you? How did the pandemic affect your mental health?
Yes, at first it was a break. At first I was at home, I didn't mind it. And I was kind of an introvert anyways, after all my hospital experiences. So at first I didn't mind, but then like being able to just be at home and be by myself, a lot of things have resurfaced. During that time period, I actually like relived some traumas that just like resurfaced from my memories that I had forgotten for a really long time. It was really interesting. And it got to a point where I was being forced to confront these demons I had, and I couldn't move on without it. Unfortunately, with my self-harm, I'm on self-sustaining medication now for the rest of my life. So it really challenged me to be consistent with even that, because I was having struggles being consistent with keeping up with my medication even. So it really challenged me to just focus, like you can't move forward in life until we handle some things first.
I think that's a very good philosophy.
Like Andrew was saying, and Rashawn, I started to focus on my nutrition more, my physical health. Exercising became part of my self-care routine, which hadn't been prior, which I'm still learning and I'm still, taking in account. Yeah, I took a lot of time actually to learn and do research. So I've been studying a lot of like neuroscientists, ways to change my brain and ways to change my body. And also different types of therapy as well. I discovered IFS therapy, internal family systems, which completely like broke through for me. Like a whole bunch of ideas just came back. Like that was a type of therapy that just helped me tremendously. And I wouldn't have been able to do that much research into it if I didn't have the time. So yeah, the pandemic really allowed me to like take a step back, look at myself and do more research as to like what I need to do. Because I really got knocked down a few levels and I have to pick myself back up.
Great. And Francesca, what about you? How did the pandemic affect your mental health?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, I was in my last year of my master's in information systems. So my days consisted of class 9:30 to 1:30, then lunch with my friends, and then hanging out in the library from about 2:30 to 8 every single day with my friends, studying and practicing these codes, aka them teaching me because I was so lost. So I really had a great support system. Every Friday was margs with my friends, and I just knew my schedule. I knew who I was going to be with and what I was going to do, and suddenly we're all isolated. We're not hanging out anymore. I'm not seeing them. My two best friends are graduating in May, and I'm not graduating till December, so we're not even living in the same town anymore. And I just went from every day being surrounded by people to completely alone except for my dog. So that was a really hard social adjustment. I definitely felt a lot of just isolation and started to struggle with more depressive feelings. But I quickly realized how much fun I could have with my puppy. So she's an 8-pound Shih Tzu, loves me because I made her walk 3 miles every day just to get outside and to move. And she did it with me reluctantly. And then we would sit on the floor and have frozen yogurt and watch a movie. And she just became kind of my emotional support that got me through that feeling of isolation. And as I got through it, I started my nonprofit was really growing and beginning in the midst of that. So it was a great opportunity for the conversation on mental health to really start and to get more people involved in having these conversations with me. So I started to learn a lot more. I ended up learning a lot more about nutrition and my body and my physical health and how it all correlated to my mental health. So I went and got an MRT panel blood test done to see what foods worked for my body and what didn't. I started getting my hormone levels checked and my blood levels checked regularly and started adjusting my daily routine. So although in the beginning, it was definitely not the most fun because I was completely alone in a college town, to getting to a place where I was learning more about myself and my health and ways to support myself. And then eventually getting to move back home with my parents and my friends from home once we were all vaccinated and safe to do so. And getting to spend a lot more time with my grandma, which is my favorite thing to do. So it's been really good now, but in the beginning it was a little not fun.
It sounds like all four of you found very healthy ways to adjust to the pandemic. Let me ask you, because we're talking about awareness and acceptance and sort of the difference in those. And one of the things that when I'm talking about this that I say to people is awareness is just, it's knowing, it's passive. Acceptance is really doing something. And one of the things that I believe would be a huge show of acceptance would be if our schools, we could start there, and our schools would treat mental health just like they treat English or math or everything else that's a part of our lives. I would love to know, when you were in elementary school and high school, was there any curriculum, any class, anything about mental health that you were exposed to in school? Rashawn's laughing. You want to go first?
I think I'm the oldest on the panel, so yeah, no, that's not something that we discussed at all in school. My entire tenure in school.
Dylan, how about you? Anything in school about mental health?
Not at all.
Francesca?
No.
Oh, Andy.
Not in the curriculum, but I had some nice teachers.
That's good. So we are lacking this acceptance that we need, this acceptance that it's normal. All right. That is sad to hear, but let's go on to some other questions. When you think about, and I know you guys are so young, and I'm asking you to think back to your childhood, which was 2 years ago or so. But anyway, when you think back, if you were talking to a group of parents and they had just learned that their child had some type of a diagnosis that was a mental health challenge, what would be your first piece of advice to that parent? What would you offer? And anyone can answer.
I'd say for me, a listening ear to let the parents voice their concerns. I think a lot of parents, at least in my experience, my parents reacted out of a place of fear because they didn't know. They never had mental health education. They knew nothing about mental illness except for the words psycho, crazy, manic, deranged, disturbed. Those were the words that they associated with mental health. So to them, it was this fear of, what did I do wrong as a parent? What do I do? How do I help my kid? I feel almost powerless and hopeless. So letting them voice their concerns, I think, is one of the most important things to me. And then sharing resources that are available. There are family trainings, there are peer support groups. There are so many ways that they can find people who are in very similar situations and work together to learn what works. And then I'd also tell them to start practicing having conversations. And even if they don't know what to respond to their kid, just listening and letting the kid know that they're there for them, whether it's through a hug, whether it's through just sitting in silence, whether it's through a cup of tea, just letting the kid know that it's okay.
Great. Other advice for our parents.
I can go in, then I would probably add definitely kind of like how Francesca said in her statement, having parents be willing, how do I phrase it? Be willing to accept the fact that they may have been wrong, and like to kind of accept that. Like I do know that when it came with me and my mom and the little bit that I said about like this, the trouble of teaching me math, she tells me all the time, like she's super sorry for it. She sees now that since she didn't understand, that the tactic that she tried was wrong. And I always think that's very, very strong and powerful of her to be willing to accept the fact that I was wrong. Because I know that there's a lot of parents out there that they don't want to accept the fact that what I'm doing with my kid is wrong. Or if they are taught differently, then there's like a reason as to why I was doing it this way, like an excuse. A lot of them have a hard time to just accept I was wrong. So just be willing to accept the fact that as you learn, you may realize that you were wrong.
Right. Dylan?
I would piggyback off of what Francesca said with resources as well. Just utilize those resources in the community. Let the child know that they're not alone. Give them the safe places to talk to, and give the child a safe place to talk to. That might be separate from the household, because the household might not be a very safe place for that child. So,
Great. Rashawn, what advice do you have for parents who are just learning that their child is going to have some mental health challenges?
I think it's a couple of layers to this. So first of all, I would let them know that for one, their child is not somebody to be fixed, and there's nothing that
Yes.
they can do to fix them, whatever challenge that they're actually dealing with. But then also letting them know that sometimes the parents are not the vessel to deliver the message to the child. Because like as Andy mentioned, sometimes they're the one that caused a lot of the damage, and so sometimes you're not able to one to reach them and to understand what's actually going on. But then sometimes you got to reach out to other individuals or professional help to get them the help that they actually need. But then also with that, I challenge the parents to what's your own stuff that you're dealing with that you may need to take care of, and lead by example to show your child that it's okay to address your mental health challenges, because of the fact that a lot of times they want to push the kid into as a therapist. I get it all the time. Here, fix my child. No,
Yes.
no, I need to fix you, because your child is with you long more than they are with me. So what are you doing, and then what things are you dealing with that you are trying to hide, that's more so coming off in your parenting and coming off the way you deal with them, but then also that you're dealing with other folks. So you have to lead by example and understand that, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go to therapy, or if I need to be on medication, I will take medication, or and then also understanding that mental health treatment doesn't just look like just therapy and medicine. Especially for myself, it could be chakra healing, it could be Reiki, it could be so many different things, especially drum circles. It could be a lot of different things but there are different ways you can address these particular things, but you have to be open to trying to do these.
Mhm. Right. Thinking back about awareness and acceptance, there's a lot of talk about the stigma of mental illness. And I actually reject that. I don't believe there is a stigma to mental illness. I believe there's a lot of bias and discrimination. And more, the National Federation is talking about social justice for people who have a mental illness. I'd like your reaction to that. Do you feel that you have had issues with bias and discrimination because of your mental illness, or am I headed down the wrong path? Is that something that you would agree with, or do you see that there really is a stigma?
I guess I'll start. I would say I've had bias and discrimination just for who I am, period, and
Mm-hmm,
which helped cause some of the root issues for my mental health challenges,
mm-hmm,
especially living in this country as a black man. So I mean, I guess it all depends on how you view it, and you want to look at it is what came first, the chicken or the egg, you know. And so that's how I view it. I mean, stigma. I know when I was initially diagnosed in 2006, that was we really didn't talk about mental health challenges, but it's a larger conversation now. Um, but I think it could be both. The stigma for because some people still shy away from just talking about it, but then yeah, you do have individuals who discriminate and ostracize individuals for living with the actual challenge, whether that be at work, whether that be at school, whether that be in the community. So yeah, I think it could be both.
I like that. Dylan, do you feel like there has been bias and discrimination in your life? Have you experienced that?
In my experience going through the actual hospitals and going in and out of residential facilities, yes. There's a lot of instances where techs or people who are working can do inappropriate things or say inappropriate things, and it just gets overlooked because whoever's utilizing that service at the time, it's just that we're not taking that serious. I've seen people inside the hospital like have their cell phones out, take videos of patients. And this actually brings me to an incident where I was in a hospital, and a staff member in the hospital, it was a nurse, they had sexual relations with another patient. And that patient came up to me and told me that patient was extremely distraught after it happened, and that nurse ended up getting suspended, right? I told my family about it, and when that happened, I was on a one-to-one, because I was self-harming. My one-to-one told me that I was lying to my face. When the head of the nurses station came up and had a conversation with me and asked me not to tell anyone. Just asked me. They said, "We know what happened, like out of like your respect for that worker, can you not tell anyone?" That was my conversation with their boss. They came to me in the psych ward and telling me that I was lying and that I was wrong. If I didn't have a grip on my reality, that could have really shoved me out there. There's no real way for people inside a psych ward to say this happened to me and it be acknowledged, unfortunately. Not that I have seen, and I've been on the other end of that.
That is a very powerful observation, Dylan. We are about to run out of time. I hope everyone has been looking at the resources in the chat, and please grab the ones that will be helpful. And if you have other questions, you can contact Michelle. She's put her email address also. Rashawn will be keynoting at the National Federation of Families Conference this year in Oklahoma City. So if you want another chance to hear him, you can certainly hear him there. As you've seen in the chat, these folks have different resources that are available. I'm going to ask folks to sort of give us their last thoughts here, and we're going to have to make them pretty quick, but I always want people to have a chance to give some last thoughts. Andy, we'll start with you.
I guess just some of my last thoughts to wrap everything up is just, it's been interesting to talk. This is definitely one of my first panels and conferences to discuss this way. So it was definitely nice to actually sit down and reflect, to really finally ask myself, like, what is my journey and what have I learned? I've been doing it, but I haven't thought about it. So it gave me a good opportunity to actually sit and think about everything that I've been through and everything that I've learned. And it makes me much more appreciative of like my resources that I have around me, as well as it's definitely been a good like reminder for like myself why I decided to be a teacher. Like because of those things that I went through, I want to reach out to the youth. And sometimes I think like, oh man, well, like I'm not writing a book or I don't have a blog, but then I get reminded like, well, I do my best. I'm out here in front of the kids every day. I have another class in probably like another half hour, and that's where I shine. I get to be like, it's okay. Just have kids. Just put your head down. You're fine. Just listen to some music. Like, you'll be okay. So it's been a good time to reflect and just remember why I'm here.
Andy, you're doing some of the most important work in the world. Every day, you are interacting with hearts and souls and minds that you can help shape and support. Francesca, what would be your final remarks?
Well, one, I want to say thank you to everyone who's listening and being so positive and encouraging in the comments. But I want to say, with the topic of acceptance, it's a lot more than just accepting that mental health conditions exist. It's about accepting ourselves and the fact that we may struggle too, whether it's with a mental health condition or with symptoms. So while we're learning to accept that mental health conditions exist, accept that there is prejudice and there's work to be done, accept that there's not enough resources available and we need to be working, having these conversations, but accepting it within ourselves too, and giving ourselves that grace and love that we want to give to everyone else.
That is so well said. I'm glad we're recording because I'm going to steal that later and use it. But I promise I'll give you credit for it. Dylan, what about you?
I wanted to say, as the mental health system is moving from a place of awareness to more of a place of acceptance, that a lot of people who are going through the system, acceptance is going to look different for so many people, because there's people who are getting treatment who don't even want treatment, who don't even want to receive these things, who are going to be backfiring. And this, you still got to accept it, and you still got to be there for what, even if it seems disrespectful at first, you're still there for them, and that's what it is.
Great insight there. Yes, it is going to be different. Rashawn, what's your final words to us today?
I think to sum it all up, I feel like, as you know, as Fran said, accepting yourself is going to be very important, but then also giving yourself a opportunity to learn who you are. And understand those aspects of yourself, what things make you mad, what things make you sad, what things allow you to uplift yourself. And then sometimes you don't have to go look for those external factors to understand what's already inside of you. But then also with that is just being able to, once you're able to accept those things about yourself, you'll be open to accepting a lot of things about everyone else, because you don't judge them based off of your own judgments on yourself. And I think that's going to be something that's important for us. And then it's going to allow you to add more humanity into your own life, which is going to spill over into everyone else's life.
Very, very well said. I think everyone would agree with me that this was 90 minutes incredibly well spent. This was a great way to sort of close out our mental health acceptance month. And we just thank you guys so much. We're going to be staying in touch and watching you as you continue your journeys. I know we have 4 very inspiring leaders here today. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Just stay tuned. We will have other things coming up as coming weeks and months go by. And please accept yourself and learn to love yourself. I think our panelists have made that statement very, very, very true. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And if my staff could stay on here for just a minute, we'll close out. Thank you, everybody.